It was late at night on a quiet highway. The road stretched out endlessly, with only the glow of streetlights flickering by. A black sedan moved smoothly in the right lane, its driver calm and collected after a long day. She had just left an important meeting, her mind still busy with thoughts of work. Everything felt ordinary, almost peaceful. But then out of nowhere, flashing red and blue lights lit up her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped. She glanced at the speedometer. Exactly 65, not a mile over. No swerving, no mistakes. She had no reason to be stopped. And yet the patrol car behind her signaled for her to pull over. What she didn't know was that this stop would change everything within minutes. She carefully steered onto the shoulder, telling herself it was nothing serious. After all, she knew the law, she respected the law, and she had spent her life working with law enforcement. She kept her hands on the wheel and waited, but something already felt off. The officer took too long to get out of his car. When he finally walked over, his steps were heavy, almost aggressive. He didn't greet her, didn't explain why he had pulled her over. Just a flat voice, license and registration. She stayed calm, professional. Slowly, she reached for her wallet, explaining each move, and handed over not just her license but also her FBI identification. She thought that would settle everything. Instead, the man looked at her ID, smirked, and said nothing. Then came the order. Step out of the vehicle. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even explained. Just an order, sharp and cold. She blinked in disbelief. She had followed every rule. She had identified herself clearly. There was no reason for this. Her instincts told her this wasn't going to be normal. She tried to reason, asked calmly why she was being detained, but his voice only grew harder. As she hesitated, headlights swept across the road. A second patrol car pulling up. Relief flickered in her chest for a moment. Maybe this would bring balance. But the second officer didn't ask questions. He stood beside the first, backing him completely. Her relief faded. This wasn't about safety. It was something else. They demanded she step out. Slowly she did, her breath steady, her eyes watching every movement. The night air was cold against her skin, but it wasn't the chill that made her tense. It was the way they stood, blocking angles, keeping her away from any dash camera view. One officer grabbed her wrist harshly, twisting the situation to make it seem like she wasn't cooperating. She pulled back firmly, her voice clear. "Take your hands off me." But her calmness only seemed to push him further. His hand shifted dangerously close to his holster. For a split second, everything froze, and then a voice broke the silence. "I'm recording this." It came from the side of the road. A man stood there holding up his phone, the screen glowing brightly. His voice was steady, cutting through the thick tension. The officers froze. The arrogance in their posture slipped. For the first time, hesitation showed on their faces. The woman felt a rush of relief. Someone was watching. Someone had proof. The officers glanced at each other nervously as the sound of more sirens grew louder in the distance. Real backup was on the way, but not the kind they wanted. She knew this was the turning point. Moments later, several squad cars arrived. A senior officer stepped out, immediately recognizing who she was. His eyes moved from her calm but steady posture to the gun still in one officer's grip. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. The command was firm. Detain them both. The arrogant smirk that had sat on the first officer's face disappeared as cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. His partner, pale and silent, didn't resist. Justice, swift and undeniable, had finally arrived. The witness kept recording, making sure not a second of this was lost. For the woman, the handcuffs on those officers were more than just a punishment. They were a symbol. They carried the weight of all the times things like this had happened without cameras, without witnesses, without justice. That night's story spread quickly, hitting the news by morning. Investigations were launched, suspensions announced, and the nation was watching. Yet for her, this wasn't about headlines. It was about the truth that too many lived, but too few could prove. Later, the man who had recorded approached her quietly. "They do this all the time," he said, "just not to someone like you." The words stung, but they also fueled her resolve. Because she knew he was right. She had the power to fight back. But so many others didn't. And that's why she made a promise to herself, to the people watching, and to everyone who had ever been silenced, that she wouldn't let this be just another forgotten story. Justice doesn't live in silence. It lives in the voices that refuse to be quiet, in the cameras that refuse to look away, and in the courage of those who stand up when it matters most. And on that lonely stretch of highway, a story that began in fear ended with a powerful reminder. The truth cannot be hidden forever. She waited in her car, the hum of the engine low, her hand steady on the wheel. The highway around her was silent, only the occasional gust of wind rattling through the trees. In her experience, traffic stops usually moved quickly. An officer would walk up, explain the reason, ask a few questions, then send the driver on their way. But tonight felt different. The minutes stretched too long, each second pulling heavier on her nerves. Finally, the driver's side door of the patrol car swung open. The officer stepped out slowly, as if savoring his control over the moment. His steps were firm but not casual. They carried a weight, a kind of stiffness that spoke more of intimidation than duty. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, moving left to right, then landing squarely on her face. He didn't say hello. He didn't explain. Just silence and the light burning into her eyes. She lowered the window, keeping her posture calm, her hands resting openly on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer," she said in a voice steady and professional. It was the same tone she had used hundreds of times in meetings, interviews, and field operations. A tone that carried respect but not submission. The man didn't respond with the same courtesy. His jaw moved lazily, chewing gum as though the moment bored him. "License and registration," he said flatly, not even glancing at her car or explaining the stop. His voice lacked the routine politeness she was used to. It wasn't procedure, it was power. For a moment she hesitated, not out of fear but out of calculation. Something about this felt off. Still, she knew what to do. Moving slowly, she spoke clearly, narrating her every action so there could be no misunderstanding. "I'm reaching for my purse on the passenger seat," she said, keeping her eyes on him. With careful precision, she retrieved her wallet and held out both her driver's license and her FBI credentials. The flashlight beam flickered across the ID. The officer leaned in closer, studying it for a beat longer than necessary. His eyes moved back to her face, then down again at the badge, then back up once more. His expression didn't soften. No respect. No acknowledgement. Only a smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth. "FBI, huh?" His words carried no hint of recognition, no sense of surprise or deference. Instead, they dripped with sarcasm, as if her identification was nothing more than a prop. "Yes, sir?" she answered evenly, her voice calm but firm. For a moment, silence filled the air again, heavy and uncomfortable. Then came the words she didn't expect. "Step out of the vehicle," her brow furrowed slightly. "Excuse me?" she asked, careful to keep her tone controlled. "I said step out," he repeated, this time with his hand hovering close to his belt. Her instincts kicked in instantly. She had worked with countless officers throughout her career, trained alongside them, respected them. But this wasn't normal. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. She kept her eyes on him, weighing her options. Every detail mattered now. His stance, his tone, even the way his fingers tapped against the holster. Years of training reminded her to stay calm, to follow procedure. But another voice inside her whispered a different warning. This was not going to be routine. Her heart was steady, but her mind was already racing. She had shown her credentials, explained herself clearly, followed every rule she knew. Yet the officer wasn't backing down. Instead, his voice cut through the night again, colder this time. "Step out of the car." The words weren't shouted, but they carried an edge sharp enough to slice through the silence. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. She inhaled deeply, keeping her eyes on him. "Officer," she began carefully, "you haven't told me why I've been stopped." The beam of his flashlight wavered for only a second before locking back on her face. He ignored her question, his jaw tight, his gum chewing louder now as if to fill the empty space between them. His stance grew stiffer, his shoulders squared, and his right hand hovered even closer to his holster. Something inside her shifted. She had seen this before, not in her own life, but in countless reports, endless footage, pages filled with stories that ended badly. And she knew in that instant that she could become one of those stories if she wasn't careful. Still, she didn't let fear show. "Sir, I've identified myself. I'm with federal law enforcement. There's no reason for this escalation." Her tone was even, steady, firm, but not confrontational. But her words only seemed to feed something in him. He leaned closer, his flashlight still aimed at her. the light nearly blinding. "Step out now!" Her grip tightened slightly on the wheel. She had faced criminals, liars, and people who had far more power than this man standing outside her window. But this was different. This was supposed to be one of their own. Someone sworn to protect the law, not bend it. She glanced at his badge for the first time, squinting against the glare of his flashlight. The nameplate read Kearns. She made a mental note of it, locking the name in her memory. The night grew heavier, the silence between them pressing like a weight. Just as she was deciding how to move, headlights swept across her rearview mirror. Another car slowed, pulling up behind the patrol cruiser. A second set of flashing lights lit up the highway. Relief flickered for only a moment. Another officer meant accountability, right? Another officer meant someone else could step in and de-escalate the situation. But as the second man stepped out of the car, she caught something in the first officer's posture. He didn't even glance back. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't relieved. He was confident, and that told her everything. The second officer walked forward with long strides, his flashlight in hand. He didn't introduce himself either. His eyes flicked quickly to the first officer, then back to her. There was no curiosity, no neutral stance, no willingness to hear both sides. Instead, his words were clipped, echoing the same coldness. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Not Director Caldwell. Not even miss, just ma'am. A word that stripped away her authority, her identity, everything she had worked for. To them, in this moment, she wasn't someone who had dedicated her life to law and order. She was just another driver they could push around. Her pulse stayed calm, but the unease settled deeper in her chest. Two officers now, both united, both pressing her to comply without explanation. She knew what that meant. If she refused, they would twist it into defiance. If she obeyed, she'd be at their mercy. Either way, she was in danger. Her eyes darted to the stretch of highway around her, empty, quiet, no other cars in sight. The only sound was the low hum of engines, the occasional buzz of the wind, and the faint metallic rattle of a flashlight being tapped against a palm. For a brief second, she considered waiting it out. Maybe reinforcements would arrive. Maybe the situation would cool down. But the way the two men stood, side by side, shoulders squared, flashlights cutting into her eyes, made it clear. They weren't here for procedure. They were here to prove a point. She swallowed hard, her voice calm but carrying steel. "If I step out, it will be on my terms, and you both will explain yourselves." The first officer's smirk widened just slightly. The second one tilted his head, his silence more unsettling than words. The air between them thickened, the balance of power shifting dangerously, and in that moment she knew. This was no longer just a traffic stop. It was a test of how far they thought they could go. The cold night air wrapped around her as she finally stepped out of the car, her every move slow and deliberate. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes, the sound sharp in the silence. For a moment she let herself breathe deeply, steadying her pulse. Years of training had prepared her for dangerous encounters, but this was different. This wasn't a cartel leader or a high-stakes operation in a foreign city. This was home. And yet the threat felt just as real. The first officer, Kearns, stood close, too close, his shadow falling across her face. He angled himself in such a way that her car's dash camera couldn't catch the full picture. She noticed it instantly. He wasn't just acting reckless, he was strategic. His partner lingered a step behind, silent, but his presence spoke volumes. It was a show of unity. A silent message. "We're in control, not you." "Turn around," Kearns ordered, his tone flat but heavy with force. She didn't move. "You still haven't told me why I'm being detained," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. That tiny act of resistance made his nostrils flare. He leaned closer, the flashlight beam cutting across her eyes again. "Suspicious behavior," he said, almost spitting the words. Her jaw tightened. "Suspicious? I was driving at the speed limit on my lane with no violations. You know that." For a second, she thought he might actually explain himself. Instead, he smirked, shook his head slowly, and muttered, refusing to comply. "That's suspicious enough," her stomach twisted. She had seen this before, not firsthand, but in files, in testimonies, in video clips that ended in tragedy. It was the same script, the same excuse used again and again. Her body stiffened, every instinct warning her this could spiral out of control. Then it happened. His hand shot forward, rough fingers closing around her wrist. The grip was too hard, his knuckles whitening with the effort. He wasn't holding her. He was restraining her. She didn't panic. Instead, her training kicked in. She shifted her weight slightly, easing the tension without making any sudden movements. "Get your hands off me," she said, her voice low but sharp like a blade cutting through the night. Kearns didn't let go. His partner took a step closer, closing the gap, his expression unreadable. Then came the words that chilled her more than the grip on her wrist. "I think she's resisting." That phrase. She knew what it meant, how easily it could be twisted, how quickly it could justify anything that happened next. The second officer's hand hovered near his radio, ready to call it in. She could almost hear the words forming before he spoke them. Non-compliant suspect. Not citizen. Not FBI director. Just suspect. Her pulse stayed steady, but inside she felt the ground shift. This wasn't about law. This wasn't about protocol. This was about power and how far they were willing to push it. Then Kearns' hand twitched near his belt. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but she saw it. His fingers brushed against the snap of his holster. The possibility was clear. Time slowed. The sound of her own breath filled her ears. She had stared down danger before, faced people who would have killed her without hesitation, but this was different. This wasn't supposed to happen on an empty road in her own country, not from the very people sworn to protect it. She lifted her chin, her voice firm. "You're crossing a line, officer. Step back now." For the first time he hesitated. Not much, but enough for her to notice the conflict flicker in his eyes. He wasn't used to people standing their ground, especially not someone who spoke with the authority she carried. But then, just as quickly, his smirk returned. "We'll see about that." And the night grew heavier still. Just when the night felt like it was closing in on her, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Hey, I'm recording this." The words echoed across the highway, breaking the tension like glass shattering on concrete. Both officers froze. Their confidence, so solid only moments ago, cracked in an instant. She turned her head just slightly, careful not to make any sudden moves. On the edge of the road stood a man, phone raised high, its small glowing screen a lifeline in the dark. His stance wasn't aggressive, but his voice carried a weight of certainty. "You sure you want to do this?" he called out again, louder this time. The air shifted. For the first time that night, it wasn't just her against them. There was a witness, and more importantly, there was proof. Kearns' jaw tightened, his smirk fading into something harder to read. He didn't lower his hand, but the way his eyes darted toward the man with the phone revealed a flicker of hesitation. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, his flashlight beam wavering slightly. Their arrogance wasn't gone, but it was wounded. She felt her lungs expand with a steadier breath. The presence of a witness didn't guarantee safety, but it tilted the scale. They could no longer act in complete shadow. Someone was watching. Someone who could share this with the world. The man with the phone stayed at a distance, smart enough not to get too close. But his voice carried all the courage of someone who understood the danger. "It's all on video," he added firmly. The silence that followed was thick. She could almost hear the calculations running in the officers' minds. They had been in control a moment ago. Now control was slipping through their fingers like sand. Her instincts told her to press the advantage. With her chin lifted, she said clearly, "Put the weapon down." Her voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't even raised. It was calm, steady, commanding. Everything their own tone wasn't. Kearns didn't move at first. His fingers curled tighter around the grip, but his breathing grew uneven. The second officer glanced between them, his posture uncertain now, as if he wasn't sure whether to follow his partner or retreat. And then, in the distance, came another sound. At first faint, then louder, rising above the quiet hum of the highway, the wail of sirens. More units were on their way. Kearns' expression faltered. He looked past her toward the glow of oncoming headlights, his mind spinning for an exit. He knew what was coming. Backup, but not the kind he wanted. She took a step forward, seizing the moment. "Touch him," she warned, motioning toward the witness with the phone. "And you'll add obstruction of justice to your record." The second officer froze mid-step, his hand half raised. For the first time since this stop began, uncertainty filled the air, stronger than intimidation. The sirens grew deafening, red and blue lights cutting across the night sky. Cars rolled in, doors opened, and more officers poured onto the scene. Some stopped in confusion at what they were walking into, their hands hovering near holsters but not yet drawing. And then, One of them recognized her. Director Caldwell. The name snapped across the highway like lightning. Heads turned. Postures changed. Authority, the kind that couldn't be ignored, settled into the moment. The man with the phone kept recording, his eyes wide but steady. For him, this wasn't just a story. It was proof. Proof that could no longer be hidden, no matter how badly the two officers wanted it buried. For the first time that night, she felt the tide turning. Not in her favor alone, but in favor of the truth, and the truth had a way of demanding to be seen. The sound of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the empty stretch of highway. The flashing red and blue lights painted the night in a strobe of urgency. Within seconds, multiple squad cars skidded to a stop, forming a barricade of headlights across the scene. Doors slammed. Officers spilled out, their boots hitting the pavement in quick succession. Some approached cautiously, hands hovering near their belts, unsure of what they were walking into. Others scanned the area, their eyes narrowing as they took in the tense tableau. One woman standing tall, her hands visible and calm, and two fellow officers circling her like predators caught in the light. For a moment, the scene hung in a strange silence, the air vibrating with the weight of what might happen next. Then a voice cut through, sharp and commanding. "Director Caldwell." The recognition shifted everything. The word director landed heavy in the air. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the newly arrived officers. In an instant, the balance of power changed. Kearns didn't flinch, but the second officer stiffened, his face paling as the reality sank in. The witness, still holding his phone steady, captured every second, the faint red dot of the recording light glowing like an unblinking eye. The senior officer, a lieutenant judging by the insignia on his chest, stepped forward quickly. His eyes flicked from Caldwell to Kearns, then to the gun still clenched in Kearns' hand. His jaw tightened. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Caldwell didn't hesitate. Her voice was clear, sharp, unshaken. "This officer pulled a weapon on me after I identified myself as FBI. I want him disarmed and detained, now." Her words rang out, leaving no room for interpretation. For the first time all night, Kearns faltered. His fingers loosened slightly on the grip of his weapon, but he didn't drop it. His eyes darted to the crowd gathering behind the lieutenant. More officers, more witnesses, more accountability. His confidence, so unshakable before, cracked at the edges. The lieutenant didn't waste time. He barked an order to the nearest officer. "Secure his weapon. Cuff him." Kearns spun, disbelief twisting his face. "You've got to be kidding me," he snapped, his voice raw with anger. "This is a misunderstanding." Caldwell didn't move. Her gaze locked on him, steady, unflinching. "No, officer," she said calmly. "This is accountability." The second officer, the one who had shadowed Kearns, took a small step back. His flashlight dropped to his side. His shoulders slumped as if he already knew there was no way out. When another officer approached him with cuffs, he didn't resist. He only lowered his head, shame heavy on his face. The clicks of the handcuffs echoed louder than the sirens, louder than the murmurs, louder than the protests spilling weakly from Kearns's lips. It was the sound of power finally being checked, of arrogance finally meeting consequence. The lieutenant's eyes swept the scene once more. He turned to Caldwell, his tone respectful now, even cautious. "Director, are you unharmed?" "I'm fine," she replied, her voice even. "But I want both of their disciplinary records pulled immediately, and I want internal affairs notified tonight." The lieutenant nodded quickly, no argument in his stance. Around them, the arriving officers exchanged looks, some tight with anger, others heavy with disappointment. They knew what this meant. They knew this wasn't just a bad call. It was a scandal. Meanwhile, the witness lowered his phone slightly, though it still recorded. His eyes met hers across the flashing lights. There was relief there, yes, but also something deeper. Gratitude, respect. The silent acknowledgement that his decision to step forward had changed everything. Kearns, now cuffed, stood rigid, his face twisted with disbelief. He still thought he might talk his way out, still thought the system would bend for him like it had so many times before. But Caldwell saw it clearly, the panic behind his eyes, the slow unraveling of a man who realized his untouchable armor had finally cracked. As the officers led him and his partner toward the waiting squad cars, Caldwell exhaled slowly. For the first time since the flashing lights had appeared in her mirror, she allowed herself to release the tight knot in her chest. The night was still dark, still cold, but the balance had shifted. Justice, at least for now, had arrived. The metal cuffs clinked as they locked around Officer Kearns's wrists, the sound cutting through the night like a final verdict. His partner, pale and silent, didn't resist as his own hands were bound. Together, they were led toward the waiting squad cars, their confidence stripped away with every step. The flashing lights bounced across their faces, revealing not authority anymore, but defeat. Caldwell stood still, her shoulders straight, her breathing steady. She had been through battles before, missions that tested her resolve, negotiations that could have gone either way. But this felt different. This wasn't a foreign enemy or a dangerous assignment. This was home, and the betrayal cut deeper because of it. Around her, the newly arrived officers watched quietly. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew what this night meant. It wasn't just about two men abusing power. It was about a system that had let them believe they could. The lieutenant approached cautiously, his tone respectful now. "Director Caldwell," he said, "do you want to press charges personally?" She shook her head slowly. "This isn't personal. This is systemic. I'll file an official report in the morning. Internal Affairs needs to be involved immediately." Her words landed heavy. There was no room for negotiation, no space for excuses. The lieutenant nodded, his jaw tight, and gave the order. More officers moved quickly, securing evidence, documenting details. They all knew this incident wouldn't stay quiet. It was bigger than just them now. Across the road, the witness lowered his phone, the screen's glow dimming against the dark. He had recorded everything, every word, every threat, every second of the power shift. His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "You good?" he asked softly, his voice carrying through the night. Caldwell nodded once. "Thanks to you." He hesitated, his voice dropping lower. "They do this all the time," he said, "just not to someone like you." The word struck her harder than the confrontation itself. Because he was right. She had the badge, the title, the authority. She had the power to fight back. But how many didn't? How many nights like this ended without a witness, without backup, without justice? Her throat tightened, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she lifted her chin, her resolve hardening. "That's why this won't be buried," she said firmly. "Not this time." By dawn, the story had already broken. The video spread quickly, impossible to ignore. News outlets replayed the footage, the public demanding answers. By noon, the Justice Department announced a formal investigation. Kearns was stripped of his badge and booked on charges. His partner was suspended, facing his own disciplinary review. The department issued a carefully worded statement, but the truth was already out there, and the world wasn't looking away. From her office, Caldwell watched the coverage in silence. The city outside her window bustled with its usual rhythm, but she knew things had shifted. Not just for her, but for the conversation this would spark. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin, her mind already turning toward what came next. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Normally, she wouldn't answer. But tonight she did. "Director Caldwell," she said. A pause, then a familiar voice. The witness. "Just wanted to say, I appreciate what you're doing. Most people wouldn't." She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a long breath. "Most people don't have the power to," she said softly. Another pause, his voice steady but weighted. "But you do." The call ended, but his words stayed with her. She looked out at the city lights, her reflection faint in the glass. Justice didn't always come easily. It didn't always come at all. But tonight had been different. Tonight had been a reminder that silence protects no one, and that the truth, once seen, could not be unseen. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel it. Not just relief, not just resolve, but something rarer, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Because justice doesn't live in shadows. It lives in the light. It lives when people refuse to look away, when voices speak up, when courage steps forward at the exact moment it's needed most. And on that lonely stretch of highway, what began as fear ended as a reminder to the world: the truth always finds a way through.